From ancient plant medicines to modern clinical trials, the world of psychedelics is undergoing a renaissance. But behind the buzzwords and research papers lies a story often untold. A story of how social justice, cultural heritage, and the urgent need for inclusivity must be preserved. How can we challenge conventional wisdom and explore how these powerful therapeutic interventions can be wielded for healing and liberation, particularly for communities who've been historically marginalized? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Zen. Today, we have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Candace Oglesby, a licensed professional counselor in private practice and who has served as the program director for an online educational training company's ketamine-assisted psychotherapy certificate program. As a psychedelic-assisted therapist, Candace has actively participated in research, clinical trials, and currently excels at both a trainer and a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant within the burgeoning mental health psychedelic space. Her expertise lies in guiding adult populations with a particular focus on empowering women of color who have bravely navigated the complexities of trauma. Candace is not only an esteemed EMDR consultant, but also holds a prestigious Level 3 certification in internal family systems. This unique blend of expertise allows her to meticulously prepare her clients for profound psychedelic experiences and skillfully guide them through the integration process using both IFS and EMDR methodologies. Beyond her professional endeavors, Candace serves as a dedicated community ambassador for Black Therapist Rock, a remarkable nonprofit organization striving to illuminate the social and psychological challenges faced by vulnerable communities while actively combating the stigma surrounding mental health. As a Black licensed professional counselor, Candace will be discussing social justice and mental health within the context of psychedelic-assisted therapy. Candace, it is a pleasure and so wonderful to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for the invitation to be here with you and your audience today. So grateful.
You've done some talks on psychedelic-assisted therapy.
I have.
We're definitely going to link those talks here. So I think for the purpose of our conversation today, can you share with our listeners, what do you mean by social justice and mental health within the psychedelic-assisted therapy context?
Yeah, so I feel like that's a very nuanced question, but I will begin by saying that there is psychedelic assisted therapy that exists. I know that most times when I'm introducing the modality, a lot of people are like, I've never heard of psychedelic assisted therapy before, but it's when we take and we leverage the tool of psychedelics. So you might be familiar with psilocybin, known as magic mushrooms, MDMA, LSD, ayahuasca, and even we consider ketamine to be part of the psychedelic family, even though, right, it is an anesthetic. But because of its dissociative change agent qualities, we have also collaborated with ketamine as part of, right, the psychedelic family. And so we use these medicines in addition to pairing them with, say, therapy that we might offer, right? So as you mentioned, I might use psychedelics to support people with the integration of internal family systems, or EMDR to support them with their healing journeys. And so when you ask me those additional questions about social justice and equity work, often within innovative treatments such as psychedelic, this continues to be a white, heterosexist, cisgendered, male-dominated space where we don't see a lot of folks who look like me or folks who come from historically marginalized populations having access to this innovative treatment. And so there has definitely been an opportunity, and I'll say folks like me, people who have come before me, that have created paths to make sure that not only people have access to this innovative treatment, but that they have representation therapists who look like them that are advocating for this type of treatment, offering this from a facilitator's perspective, and also seeing themselves in the model itself, because it is very much a westernized medical model, especially given the medical piece that we're seeing psychedelics being offered in, which is usually, especially here in Maryland, is within clinical trials, because most of these substances are still Schedule 1 drugs, with the exception of ketamine, which is Schedule 3.
Hmm. Yeah, so you're talking about making sure that therapists of color are involved in the process of delivering the psychedelics while they are also integrating the therapeutic, in your case, IFS and EMDR. It's fantastic to have a therapist of color implement those treatments. The other part, just because we've had other guests and who have done psychedelic assisted therapy, I'm not an expert in it, so please forgive me on some
Yeah,
of my questions,
absolutely.
okay?
Absolutely.
And so my understanding is that it technically started more from plant medicine, which has already been there. And
Yeah.
so it's very strange to hear that it's put in this sort of schedule, the drug schedule, schedule 1, was it schedule 3 or 2?
Yeah, so Schedule 1, right, which is the legal substances, and Schedule 3 is legalized. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's strange to hear put that way. So where does the social justice come in? Because part of me is thinking, wait a second, this is plant medicine. I mean, I, from a social justice perspective, would say, why are you even putting this in an illegal substance?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so to your point, right? I want to acknowledge that these medicines did not begin with science in the traditional westernized medical model way of being, even though I think when we look at documentaries, when we look at research, I think one could be convinced or conditioned to think that these medicines started with science and data and research. But no, these medicines started millennials ago. And aspects to specifically Black and Brown Indigenous communities. So even when I'm doing trainings with culturally diverse audiences, letting them know, like, hey, these medicines can be found in certain parts of Africa, right? Points of Central America, South America, and just the surprise that people have, because again, what has been convinced of us is to think that these medicines started with science. And I think that's why the social justice piece is so important, so that even from a historical lens, that people are aware that these medicines started with indigenous folks, right in community, for spiritual and ceremonial practices, not because you have some sort of mental health diagnosis. So I even think part of the social justice movement is to also decouple what has been, oh, you can only have access to psychedelics if you have treatment resistant depression or if you have anxiety, when in fact, no, this medicine is for people who are just looking to deepen what is their well-being, whether that's tapping into their highest selves, their own inner wisdom, whether that's tapping into the spiritual and ceremonial aspects of these medicines. But again, I think helping people to unlearn what psychedelics is even for and who it's for. Because even, I tell people all the time, when I was first introduced to psychedelics, I'm like, that's for white people. Black and brown people don't do psychedelics, right? But that was coming from a misinformed, but also, I would say, protective state, because of my experience with being part of the DARE generation, because of the war on drugs, because of how substance use addiction has impacted my own family. So I also want to acknowledge that Black and brown people, are very much validated in their fear, their stigma, and their miseducation because of the historical context, I think, in which these medicines have been associated with. But I think that's why the education, and why people who are representative of these communities to share the education, is so important, to really be a part of that unlearning, but also bringing back to self, to say, like, no, these medicines are a birthright to you and your communities just as much as they are the dominant culture. So that's where I kind of see that social justice plug being in it, kind of every aspect, even within this space, all the way from the education piece to also how we use these medicines, especially within a community framework, from a decrim perspective as well. Yeah.
I can totally see the passion as you're talking about this. And I love the example here. It didn't even occur to me that right now people are reporting that, well, ketamine is better for treatment resistant depression. But
Mm,
you're saying that's not a social justice perspective. We want to be
yeah,
able to offer this even before. Why can't it just be an option? And why can't it
yeah,
be a part of a spiritual journey when it is being done in collaboration with a therapist who is trained? Because you're
yeah.
doing that training.
Yeah, and I would even say, right, even therapy is colonized ways of being, right? When Black and Brown people have historically been healing in community, and really, right, having someone that is equipped from a trauma-informed lens, but doesn't necessarily have to look like a therapist. It could be a community leader. It can look like someone's shaman. It can look like someone's spiritual leader. It can look like just doing this in community with people that you trust who can keep you safe, but also are informed from a trauma informed lens about how these medicines work. So I also want to say that too, like therapy is one aspect of facilitation, but it's not all. And I think traditionally speaking, right, historically speaking, we've gotten our healing not just from therapy. It's in fact been in community that has allowed us to persevere and to be able to thrive.
Yeah. Well, thank you for pointing that out because it's almost as though it creates this sense of ownership,
The
like psychiatry.
gatekeeping.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the gatekeeping. That's great word, better word, gatekeeping. Like therapists and psychiatrists are the one who can deliver
Mhm.
this. When, like you said, wait, shamans have access to this, and frankly, I've had clients who will, they fly to South America to actually be in community with certain populations in order to get this type of treatment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing I am wondering about too is, do you have any anecdotes or from your experience, what do you suppose is making it where it's difficult for people of color to access this treatment? I mean, you mentioned some of the historical context. Oh gosh, is a group of folks going to disseminate a drug to our
Yeah.
population? So there's some skepticism. Are there other factors that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so right, if I'm given the state in which I'm living in, Maryland, we do not have any Schedule 3 substances outside of ketamine. And so how people are able to gain access to this right now legally is within the context of clinical trials. And so actually I have a good colleague where we're actually facilitating a study right now where we have done some qualitative and quantitative data where we've been studying what have been some of the barriers and opportunities for BIPOC therapists in this space. And in their interviews, they've talked about just what have been some barriers for their own clients. And so, what that has looked like is the lack of representation. So, not seeing someone who looks like me, who's been able to navigate these substances in a safe and responsible way. I would say costs, right? So, even where states where they have been able to decriminalize, but also offer, say, for example, psilocybin through a facilitation process, you're talking about easily $3,000 for preparation, dosing, and integration session. I don't know too many people who look like me who can afford a $3,000 psilocybin facilitation session out of pocket. And because insurance does not cover it, even right now, I offer ketamine assisted therapy. We found a way for insurance to be able to cover what is preparation and the integration sessions and an hour of dosing to really support people in, I think, a holistic and meaningful way can be up to 3 hours. Insurance doesn't cover the cost of the 2 hour duration. So those that I'm serving, either, they're paying the 150 an hour or I'm having to offer what is a sliding scale. I also think back to that education piece, there's just a lot of misinformation that exists out there, and we're not acknowledging past and historical harms and traumas, which I think can lead to mistrust. And I think also too, right, again, because we're therapists operating in a system, we're not sharing experiences, and part of my approach is that I'm not necessarily going into detail about my medicine experiences, but I am not someone who offers people to sit with me to support them in their healing journeys and not disclose that I also have a personal relationship with the medicines that I'm offering, because that is a huge trust factor. Like, and we know this because research has shown that, a lot of clients, particularly Black and Brown clients, don't want to sit with people who don't have an experience with the medicine. So those are just some factors that I'm seeing, even how we talk about this model. Again, can clients see themselves in the model? So if it's not being presented by someone who looks like them, who's talking about this from a culturally inclusive lens, why would I want to do something, one, that I know very little about, but even have my own protections around, right? Because I have seen how abuse has impacted family and friends. So those are just some small things that I can think about in terms of what have been some barriers that, based on the study that we've done, but also just my own personal encounters. When people are coming to me and they're asking about this type of treatment, what has prevented them from maybe seeking this treatment any earlier, but also what might be a barrier to, even after they meet with me, to discontinuing. And right now, because of what is happening, right, people are being laid off, and people are losing their health insurance, just given the larger political landscape. Financially, it has been hard for people to access this type of treatment.
Yeah. It's it's just baffling that insurance does not cover this treatment, but they'll cover substance use treatment. They'll cover a bunch of other treatments. Uh, I think cost is a huge barrier,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
also,
Capitalism, right? Essentially,
yes,
it's capitalism.
yes. Oh gosh, gatekeeping, capital, that's part of the capitalistic.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh.
exactly.
And you really
Exactly.
put it quite on the mark here. What's the phrase you just used in reference to the use? You don't, I think you mentioned either through your work or the studies that you've been involved with, which is clients don't see themselves as
Mhm.
part of the treatment process. So
Yeah,
why would they even use it?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that's why it's so important, part, right, of the social justice lens of why we need more culturally inclusive therapists in this space, and why we need more culturally inclusive lens when it comes to curriculum development, protocol development, so that clients can actually see themselves in the model and know that, hey, this treatment is not just for a select few, but it's for folks who are really intentional about wanting to heal, wanting to be liberated. But I have to see myself in that liberation to even conceive that this is even for me.
Mm, mm. And I think the other part too is, even if this were made available, even if insurance were to cover it, we have select companies that can actually produce, right? There's
Mhm.
also another factor there as opposed to people just growing it, plants.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, Big Pharma, I don't know if you noticed, Ray has already staked its claims into psychedelics, especially when we see publicly traded companies that are also trying to get first dibs on this. Whereas it can take you $20, $30 to grow your own mushrooms. So, like, why would I put myself through the rigorous processes of trying to go through a trial that might not even accept me, because counter indicators are real when it comes to this medicine? It has not been studied in every population and every diagnosis, when I could just grow my own mushrooms for $20 or $30 at home, and get the help and support that I need that way. And that has risk, right, associated with it as well. So I don't want to undermine the risk that people take in doing that. But I think just from a larger perspective, when we are asking ourselves, right, if we're saying that this medicine is for everybody and it's supposed to be a new pathway, right, compared to, right, other medicines that we know have not traditionally worked for folks, then we have to ask ourselves, are we truly making this accessible? Not just from who gets to be involved in the access to treatment, but also even just from a financial, perspective. And I think, to your point, in terms of, we'll have so many programs for substance use because we are a very reactive country and nation. We are not proactive. Like, how do we support people from even getting to the point of needing to be in a substance use addiction treatment facility, when there are actually innovative ways that we have to even help people before they even get to that point? But I think it's just part of, I think, some of the larger landscape issues around how we are a very reactionary country and society versus being preemptive, and try to preemptively take care of people before they get to the point of needing, these dire services.
Yeah. Because it's like, well, is there money in prevention? That gets into a whole nother ballgame.
Capitalism, right? There's
Right,
no money
right,
in prevention,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Oh, it's like the conversation of social justice is so infused in every step of our care.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Now
Especially
for
when we look, I was just going to say, especially when we look at the intersectionality of social determinants of health and mental health care, right? It's all connected, especially when we begin to really pull back the layers and see the connection, right? And this idea that systemic oppression is steeped in every aspect of the system. There's no getting around that.
gosh. So for therapists who are trying to fight the system or advocate and make
Mm,
this more readily available, because we're caught in the system. Like, I mean, I would love to be able to support my clients in doing this work, but there's so many restrictions involved. So
yeah.
for therapists who are there's just different degrees in their development, which is one, okay, I'm a little skeptical about psychedelic assisted therapy. And of course I was reading about back in the days it's like MDMA, seeing friends
Hmm.
take it, and then of course going to party scenes and see, oh wow, whoa, there's something here, right?
Yeah.
And but those back in like early 90s, and then now it's a little bit more popular in terms of just
Yeah.
generally psychedelic assisted therapy. So for therapists who have made been around it, who are open, supporting this, as well as those who are maybe skeptical, though open to it, and want to make this available. What tips do you have? Any advice?
Yeah, yeah. So I will say that I always invite people to kind of sit with like, what is it that you are maybe imagining wanting to do in the space, right? Because I will say that I started one way and I ended up in a completely different space. And so when I say that, when I started off, I was brought in as a clinical trial therapist. I knew very little about psychedelics. I knew very little about psychedelic assisted therapy. But as I started to make steps and strides within the space, I just saw so many missing gaps. And so, well, here's an opportunity to really advocate and speak to some of the missing gaps in a way in which nobody was speaking to. So, yeah, I started as a clinical trial therapist, but then I quickly became an advisor. I became a mental health equity consultant, advising on clinical trials, the curriculum, content creation. I started to train. Then more recently, I got into policy work. So even this past July, and our work started in October of 2024, but I'm on the Maryland Governor's Task Force of the Responsible Use of Natural Psychedelic Substances, really shedding light on the equity piece and how we need to be responsible in this report that we're putting together to really shed light on the equity aspects of this, which includes the war on drugs, which includes financial accessibility, which includes that if we're going to start off with, a particular group, that we don't exploit them at the same time of lifting them up and empowering them. So I will say that I think it's important to maybe get curious about what one person may want to do and be open to the unfolding of that process, because where I started is not how I ended up. And very much still feel like this process is unfolding. The second is to get trained, right? To be educated. I will say that when I started, there was very limited courses that were coming from a culturally inclusive lens. There are a little bit more now, right now. I have a good friend and colleague who is operating psychedelic liberation training right here in Baltimore, who holds a number a week of liberated training in psychedelics. Name is Charlotte, but she's doing some magnificent work and trying to get people educated from not just a culturally inclusive lens, but a trauma informed lens as well. And to find your tribe, I will say that when I started, it was a shock to the system around the whiteness that I experienced, but I think also the microaggressions that I experienced in this space. And very early on in the process, I questioned whether I should continue in the spirit of transparency because of being the only one. And I think the cost and sometimes the target that is put on one's back, not for just being the only one, but also speaking up in a space. And if it wasn't for my tribe letting me know that I could not quit, but they would be here to catch me, I would probably have not gotten as far and have had the experiences that I've had in this space. And so, and developing a relationship with the medicine, I get that for some medical reasons, people can't do that. But I will say that me building relationship with medicine has not only added value to what I can offer to my clients and even just the organizations and businesses that I have supported, but it has also helped for me to continue to decolonize myself, to be able to continue to show up and do the work of social justice. And I think that that work starts from within. And so I have been a huge proponent of my own decolonization so that I can continue to do the social justice work within the psychedelic space and the movement. So just to recap all of that, right? For one, people to get clear about what they're wanting to be and do in this space, like what are you really up to? Get trained, get some experience sitting with folks, find your tribe because community is so important. And then also being able to build personal relationship with the medicine. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for those phenomenal tips because oftentimes when people are thinking about trying to do a work, a treatment, rarely do they really envision what you just mentioned. Where do you want to be in this space? Wow,
Mhm.
such a great question. We don't
Yeah.
often think about. Usually we jump into the skill development, the training part.
Yeah.
That's the easy
Yeah.
part. Rarely do we think about where do we see ourselves in a space. And honestly, it sounds like, I mean, you can do so much in a space. It's from a social work model, at the individual level, and you move on to the macro level to
Mhm.
work with state legislatures in Maryland. That's amazing. Now, you doing this work, as you highlighted, can be taxing given
Mhm.
the microaggressions that you are faced with by being in this space. You're continuing to do this. So, can you share with us any memorable events or circumstances that influenced how you got into doing this work?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I knew very little about psychedelics, and the invitation came from someone who wasn't at the time, but then became like a mentor in some ways. And so it was actually during COVID. And I remember just kind of feeling like, man, if we persist in this way, I am not going to be able to keep seeing 10 trauma clients in a day back to back, and also needing to take care of myself. And so that's when I also started my own consulting business because I'm like, I need to develop other avenues of income that is not going to physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually continue to take a tax and a toll on my very essence in my body, right? Even just the somatic piece of that. And so there was an opportunity to come into this space. And again, by introduction of clinical trials, not realizing that in undergrad, I studied gender and diversity studies. And I think even from the populations that I chose to work with very early on, working with incarcerated men, that's where I had my earliest beginnings. Even from undergrad, I did an inside out prison exchange program, but social justice has been very much a part of my work since college, even before that in high school, doing a lot of community service. But I just knew that it would be irresponsible of me to come into such an innovative space, an opportunity for me to create my own path and not highlight and empower historically marginalized communities who I knew did not have access to this space. I knew that there were voices who needed to be at the table who, unfortunately, I knew would never have a seat to be able to have their voices uplifted. But I could be the person to say, you know what, I'm in relationship with these communities. How can I leverage my position of power, influence, and privilege to bring these voices into the room, even though they physically might not have been here? And that was revealed to me very early on in this work. And so, I've had people question, why I do the work that I do, and have invited me somewhat to just allow my presence to be the disruption. But to me, that feels a bit of complicitness. And I think that to whom much is given, much is required. And because I knew that I was coming in, and I might not have had that much power and privilege, right? But I wanted to make sure that with whatever power, privilege, and influence that I had, that I used that to empower and uplift folks who definitely needed to have access to this.
Yeah, yeah. And can you share with me, as a person of color, what were some challenges you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had people question my expertise in this area, even though I never claimed to be an expert. But I think that I needed to get clear on my why. And so, what was helpful for me is to develop a secure attachment with like my own work and what I was up to in this space. And so, that's why that inner work is so important because I think for me, I was becoming easily distracted by what felt like was trying to figure out, okay, what am I up to? Like, I know that I'm being asked to do this thing, but am I clear on what I'm up to in this space, regardless of the expectations, even the metrics that people are trying to put on me? And so when people would question my, my expertise, I met that with, in no shape or form have I announced myself to be an expert, but I am a person of color. And I think it's important that people of color, people from historically marginalized communities, see someone that looks like them being able to be educated in a way to talk about these medicines that really evoke trust, but to say, like, oh, I see myself in her. Like, maybe this treatment can be for me too, especially my clients who were stuck, especially my clients who wanted to take their healing, their recovery to the next level. I mean, I've had to go above and beyond, to get trainings, even just for people to see me as an equal in this space. I feel like this space is heavy on the academic. So I'm a master's level clinician. Sometimes people won't even talk to you in this space unless they know that you have a doctorate, beside your name. So having to prove myself that, yeah, I might not have the letters behind my name, but that doesn't speak to my intelligence. It doesn't speak to my passion, and it doesn't speak to my compassion that I have for people and my advocacy of why I do this. So those are just some challenges that I've had to overcome, but I have found the more I am tuned in to what I'm up to and having secure attachment to the work that I have produced and the work that I continue to produce. And I think how I show up in this space and how I have supported people in this space, allowing that to kind of speak for itself. Like, I don't need to convince people of why I need to be here. I've already proven that.
You've proven that to yourself. Well, I love what you're saying. There's the
Mhm.
secure attachment, the security that you have regarding yourself in this space, and people can't question that. And also to see the gaps, you see it, and to be able to vocalize and just say, "Hey, if if you really want to do this, make this therapy for other folks, well, are everyone being represented as part of this treatment? You need people of color to be able to understand this treatment. They're not just going to, hey, here's, I'm just going to make an assumption. A white physician or a white doctor is administering this, and suddenly I'm going to trust him or her.
Yeah,
We need
yeah.
everyone involved in this process. Yeah. Yeah. So for you, what does it mean to be a Black therapist?
I always say to be my ancestors' wildest dreams. Am the manifestation of the people who have come before me, the people who have died, the people who have just produced blood, sweat, and tears. Even like when I'm doing presentations, I always acknowledge my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, who's still with me. She's my only living grandparent. And I just think about her, being from the South, having very little education, made her way to Maryland for better career opportunities. She had two kids at the time and would have two more that she would need to be able to take care of. And so just her work ethic, she worked for the post office until she retired. But I am the grandchild that she dotes on. She now has Alzheimer's. And so, her memory is a bit limited. But, even before then, I just the gratitude and the joy and the pride that, my grandmother took in me. And even just my family, my parents made a lot of sacrifices for me to be here as well. And so, when I think about that question of what it means to be a Black therapist, I think that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I feel like, I would like to think that I am making them proud and how I show up. But I think also the unfinished work of my ancestors too. I feel like I am very much a product of that too. Just because someone physically dies doesn't mean that their legacy and their work doesn't continue on through the future generation. And I think I am the mere example of what continued unfinished business looks like.
Wow. And you're continuing that path. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm, mm. And Candace, how can we support you?
Yes, I love that question. I have a couple of things going on right now. So I am offering a quarterly meetup with Black and Brown therapists in Maryland. It's an opportunity for therapists to grab food. It's an opportunity for us to talk about the myths and the truths of psychedelics. I am, again, a huge proponent of the education piece. I don't believe that people can make informed decisions without education, especially Black and Brown people. So it's a paid for dinner. We also support local Black owned restaurants in the process of supporting Black and Brown therapists, of getting them educated, because we don't need any more saviors in our communities. We are the ones with the connections and with the relationships. It's about just equipping Black and Brown therapists to not just be educated, but to also help them feel confident that they can get trained in this modality and take it back into their communities. So that's Liberation Through Plants and Plates. And it is on my website. I'm also right now, some colleagues and I, we've launched an Afro Psych card deck. It's the first of its kind, but it's a preparation and integration card deck for Black and Brown folks who are having medicine experiences out in the communities. But there's questions, there's prompts, there's mantras to really support people on their healing journeys in the medicine space. And these questions, these prompts, they are culturally inclusive. We want people to see themselves in the deck through whether it's the visual art that we have on the cards, and then to the questions that we're even asking people to consider before they take a journey.
Oh my gosh. I'm about to jump out of the seat. I'm so excited hearing this. I mean, this is what we call about connection and resources. Who would have thought, oh, wait, these question decks, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's like providing these type of resources for clients of color when they're using psychedelic assisted therapy, so that it isn't this traditional, you check in the office, you meet with your therapist, and then that's done.
Yeah.
No, there is this community, not just that, the therapists are also familiar with some of these questions. Oh, I have a client. Maybe let's explore this question with this client, make it more tailored.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, I can just tell,
Exactly.
I mean, there's so much love and investment in what you are doing.
Yeah, I mean, and this is my offering back to the community. So again, right back to that statement of to whom much is given, much is required. And so not just kind of seeing the gaps, but I think to fill in where the shortage of the gaps is really important, because you don't make it to certain levels without reaching back to the community and offering. So these are just the beginning. I do believe that our deck and the Liberation for Plants and Plates, Afro Psych is the name of the deck, is just the beginning. And and these are movements. These are not just things that we do, we say, but this is an opportunity for us to resist and to also be in community, to heal together, but also to be a part of a larger movement, which is something greater than myself, and it's greater than all of us combined. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Candace, thank you so much. I mean, just for the amazing conversation and just helping us think through just different stages of the therapeutic process with psychedelic assisted therapy, how social justice can be infused in each step of the way. Also, just
Absolutely.
how we ourselves, oftentimes we think of therapy just very individual, yet you're taking it into the community. You're even collaborating with legislatures. I mean, it's just amazing, really thinking more expansively about social justice work. So again, Candace, thank you so much for your
Thank you,
wonderful
Jack.
contributions.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's just been a pleasure to be here and to talk to you about something that I am extremely passionate about, but also extremely passionate in making sure that if people want access, they get access in a way that is allowing them to see themselves in the model, and also in a safe, trauma-informed way as well.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.